Since Quest 3's release, over 100 games have gotten enhancements for the new hardware. The results have been hit and miss, with some games like Saints and Sinners Chapter 1, Red Matter 2, and Resist being incredible, while others were not so good. Polyarc Games, the makers of Moss and Moss Book 2, are celebrating the release of Quest 3S with fresh updates for both games. I'm Live Open Mike, let's talk about it. I've talked before about the state of games over the life cycle of the Quest. To be frank, there are games out there that you're playing on your Quest 3 that are running versions optimized for the Quest 2 and in some cases versions built for the Quest 1. That was the case with the first Moss game. If you don't know these games, they're fantasy action adventure puzzle games. You play as a character called the Reader. Sitting in the library, you dive into the world of Moss where you meet Quill, a young mouse you control in third person. Together you two are what's called Twofold, a mystical connection that lets you assist Quill in the land of Moss in combat and basic puzzle solving in a diorama style presentation. These are two of my favorite games in VR. Everything from the fantasy setting, the storytelling, the amazing music, and Quill herself is just incredible. Moss Book 2 was my game of the year in 2022 for VR. But prior to this update, if you look at the graphics using the Quest 3, more so in the first game than the second, you see the game's age plain as day. Moss Book 1 was originally released on the first PlayStation VR in 2018, and it was a launch title for the original Quest 1 in 2019, so it's definitely in need of a facelift. Both the before and after footage in this video was shot natively on the Quest 3 at 2K recording resolution, which should tell the story here. Reading straight from Polyarc Games' statement, quote, "The first thing we knew we wanted to do was update the graphical fidelity of Moss and Moss Book 2. To do this, we leveraged the significant improvements to GPU performance, enhanced display resolution, and dynamic foveated rendering of the Quest 3 and Quest 3S. This allows us to render Moss at 150% of its original resolution, creating more detailed environments while delivering crisp, sharp visuals without sacrificing performance. Water visuals, a popular fan request, contrasting colors, new high-quality effects, a Quill drop shadow, animated book pages, shader improvements, and improved interaction visuals. Moss Book 2 is receiving visual updates, but not as impactful as Moss since Moss Book 2 was developed for the Quest 2. There is no cost to players. The update will be rolled into the current build of the game for Quest 3 and Quest 3S players." End quote. I'm hoping the footage here speaks for itself, but for anyone just listening to audio, I can firmly say after 60 plus games I've personally tried, this is one of the best Quest 3 updates available. Another update they made was to the combat. I love the combat in both games, but admittedly it can be pretty challenging for some players, almost deceptively so if you got hooked in by the cute visuals and expected a more chill experience. Again from Polyarc's statement, quote, "We know that every player enjoys games differently. Some of us love mind-bending puzzles that force you to rethink how you'd approach a problem. Others love the rush of combat and that feeling of victory when your strategic planning pays off. And for some, it's all about the story, immersing yourself in the world entirely unlike your own and being taken on a fantastical adventure that threatens to tear out your heart while promising to put it back together more full than ever." The next piece of the puzzle was more challenging. How do we retain the experience of Quill's heroic journey while easing player friction to make both games more accessible to a broader audience? Comfort and accessibility have always been at the forefront of Polyarc's games. For instance, with the initial release of Moss, we were determined to make our games comfortable for players who had previously felt sick or uncomfortable in VR, a decision that led us to choosing seated play and a diorama-esque experience. After many long conversations, we decided that players should be able to opt out of combat encounters. Love the challenge? No problem. Just here for the puzzle, story, or cute protagonist? That's okay too. Players can skip combat proactively before the encounter begins. To do so, open the menu, select Skip Combat. The game will also prompt you if you'd like to skip the encounter if you have died more than 3 times. Players may choose whether to accept the combat skip or continue with the encounter, end quote. The skip combat feature is available for both Moss and Moss Book 2. As far as other platforms, Moss had this to say, quote, "As far as skipping combat, we're really excited about making the joy of Moss and Moss Book 2 accessible to all players. We're going to see how players react to the update on Quest 3 and Quest 3S to determine if it's something we want to bring to other platforms." Regarding the visuals, we previously upgraded the visuals for PSVR 2 and Pico, the headsets released since Moss launched. For players utilizing PC VR, they're already able to utilize the visual upgrades to Moss and Moss Book 2 depending on their PC hardware and graphics settings. One final note on the achievements in the game, per Polyarc, quote, "Players that use the skip combat feature forego the opportunity to achieve 4 achievements in Moss and 3 achievements in Moss Book 2. This means players utilizing skip combat will not be able to platinum either game." Moss and Moss Book 2 currently retail for $20 on all platforms. At the time of this video, you can get both games in the bundle on MetaQuest and Steam at 30% off. Thanks to Polyarc Games, I'm doing a giveaway for a MetaQuest key for each game. Details of that are in the description, so be sure to check that out. Thanks, and I'll catch you on the next one.